What was your assessment of the way your officers responded?
You know, I couldn't be prouder. Our officers, you know, do that initial assessment to see, is this something that that I can take immediate action on to get somebody into custody. But once they saw, and as it became clear as we're reviewing body-worn camera video and the crowd starts to clear out and you can see the victims laying in the roadway, they didn't hesitate for 1 second. They ran up and began life-saving measures on those folks. I just couldn't be prouder of them. They did an incredible job.
Let's talk about the training that goes into something like that. Clearly, you know what you're in for. You know what the business is. But when that happens and it's time to make those decisions, how much training played into what they were able to accomplish in such a quick fashion on Saturday night?
You know, over time, our training when it comes to these type of situations has really evolved. And starting in the academy, they receive first responder trauma care, a course that they receive in which they get the individual first aid kits, or the IFAKs, and they also receive the combat tourniquets. And so both of those are worn on their duty belt. They carry them with them all the time. And I can't tell you how many times that we have saved lives by placing a tourniquet, or placing a chest seal, or placing the gauze on people to stop bleeding from happening. This was just a big event in which lots of officers were doing it. So, you know, they because of the way that we train, and they're automatically thinking in that way, and then they jump into actions, and that's what we saw happen on Saturday.
I wanted to ask you about the officers using their duty vehicles to carry patients. And I know the man who tragically lost his life, his family mentioned the fact that the officers put him into their car to take him to the hospital. A, how unique is that? And B, is that something that was decided in the moment, or is that something training brought them to do?
You know, it's pretty unprecedented. I'm not going to say it's never happened, but it's very rare. And the reason being is that we have an outstanding EMS system here. A lot of times those folks beat us to the calls for emergency medical care. But this was a little bit of a unique situation with the fact that it was a densely packed Friday night on 6th Street. And then you had the chaos on top of that after the shots rang out. EMS was having a hard time getting to the scene, and because of that, our officers realized that, you know, moments and seconds matter, and they really needed to get those people for emergency medical care that was obviously far beyond their capabilities right there. And they made the decision, and I'm glad that they did, to go and use their own vehicles to do that.
When something like that occurs, and the staffing shortages you have to deal with here are documented, does that affect other areas in town, as most of those officers, well, I don't know how many came from other places. I would assume some came from other jurisdictions. Does that affect the other surrounding areas?
It really does. It really does. You know, we are facing staffing challenges right now. And so as this unfolded, a call went out citywide for officers, if they weren't tied up, to go ahead and respond, and many did. And they stayed on scene for hours sometimes. That affects the rest of the city and the response times they're going to get, because there's now fewer officers in those areas to respond. So, you know, what our supervisors do in all of these scenarios when this happens is determine at the earliest possible time to start releasing officers from the scene, sending them back to sector, so that we're being cognizant of that.
The Cadet Academy recently began, and I know 100 future officers are going through the training that they are needing to do what these officers did over the weekend. How does an event like this affect a training class? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a way for them to see the officers actually doing what they're training to do. How does that affect a training class?
You know, I think that what we will do is use it as a training moment for them, and a teachable moment to just see that we really are guardians of this community. Just looking back over the last several weeks and some of the things that have been highlighted here at the Austin Police Department, we've had officers that are pulling a man from a burning vehicle. We've had officers that pulled boaters that got stranded at Longhorn Dam and saved their lives, and now this. And it just goes to show that, you know, if we can show that to our cadets and really just say, this is the expectation, this is what we want you to do, they're going to embody that from moment one when they start.
Speaking of the boating rescue, which was another amazing job by the officers here, And then downtown, I know there's some talk of, with budget cuts and things, doing away with the mounted patrol unit perhaps, the lake unit perhaps. Those two things in the last 7 days have been critical in saving lives. What do you tell the citizens when you hear people talking about taking that funding away, and those two things specifically being affected by that, knowing how important they are to some?
Yeah, they are. They're extremely important. And, you know, we continue at the police department, and me in particular as the head, is to go ahead and highlight all of the amazing things that these units are doing. I think that's incredibly important for us to do, for people to understand, not just people in the community, but obviously positions of leadership here within the city. And I think they do. I think they realize the value that these units bring. We've been very intentional in how, if we have had to bring people from specialized units back to patrol, looking at areas like our lake patrol and our mounted and other units that we have not done that to, that we continue to keep those functional because they are so important for public safety.
The staffing shortages, again, I've talked about that, but with the way Friday night, Saturday morning went, did it affect it in any way in the response? Did a staffing issue affect any part of that situation with your officers?
I've said often that we have a staffing issue in the department. I am glad to say that Friday that was not, it did not negatively impact this. We had, normally on a Friday night, I have 3 evening shifts and a night shift that are working. On this particular Friday night, I had an extra evening shift that we had staffed because of the large numbers that Rot Rally brings in as well. And all of them, with the exception of one, which was missing 2 officers, all of them were staffed to 100%. So I had beyond my normal staffing, actually, as well as the mounted patrol. So, you know, all of that was, you know, we know that officers were in that block when that happened. And but for the large crowds and everything that was going on, might have actually even seen the shooter, but they didn't because it was so densely packed.
A lot has been made of gun violence. You know it more than anyone. Does Austin have a gun violence problem, do you think?
I think we do. I think that this is what I've been talking about, you know, when we look at gun violence and how it's increased as we've been tracking since 2015 to where we are today. It's very, very concerning to the point where I started a violence intervention program shortly after taking over as the interim chief. That continues, and what we're doing is really trying to target our most prolific and violent offenders that are using guns to commit crime, and seeing how to make sure we're partnering with our DA's office and the prosecutors there, as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office, to see if some of these cases can go federal. But whatever it takes to start driving that gun violence down, as well as seizing firearms that are illegally possessed, so we get those guns off the street.